and we'll try to end like basically in exactly 2 hours. All right, so hello everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Paul D'Ambrosio, and I teach Chinese philosophy at East China Normal University in Shanghai, where the 四海为学 collaborative learning project is based. I want to welcome you all to our 11th roundtable and our 51st event today. We have Professor Alba Curry, Professor Frank Saunders, and Yedong Chen here to discuss philosophy, culture, and video games. I know all these people well, or pretty well, and they're all great people, so I think we're going to have a great event today. Our chair is Yuan from Duke University, and it's become a tradition here at 四海为学 to give younger scholars a chance to be part of high-profile academic events by inviting them to take part as chairs or discussants. So if there's any younger scholars in the audience today who wish to be part of a future event, please email me. Our event today will be 2 hours and end promptly at 10 p.m. Beijing time. Before getting things started and handing them over to Yuan, I just want to say a few things about the 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Academic Forum. The 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Forum hopes to distinguish itself from some of the less productive conventional practices sometimes found in contemporary academia. As posted on our website, we are not interested in male peacocks, in jerks, or in any form of egoism or self-promotion. We hope to curb all types of aggressive and "look at me, I'm smarter than you," or "don't I know so much," and similar attitudes sometimes found in academic exchanges. We might even go so far as to say that we hope to be the counterbalance to the negative attitudes often found in blind reviews. While there is certainly a time and a place for anonymity, or at least the appearance of anonymity, communication in academia should also have just as much time and place for speaking to one another in more congenial and community-forming settings. The neologism 四海为学, which was created by Robin Wong, is a play on 四海为家, and we hope to keep this idea at the forefront of all of our events. The 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Project seeks to accomplish these shifts in orientation during academic exchanges by encouraging productive communication, humble discussions, real questions, and responses that are open and honest. We hope to foster environments where people truly learn from and with one another. So I just want to once again thank Frank, Yedong, and Alba for being here and sharing their thoughts with us. And thank you very much, Yuan for agreeing to chair this. Also, please, please take part as well, because I know that you're also interested in this area, Yuan. So anytime you want to jump in, I'm sure they're all nice people, so no one's going to mind. Yuan is a PhD candidate at Duke University, and she's working with Professor David Wong. She's mostly interested in virtue epistemology, social and formal epistemology, and Chinese philosophy. We're very happy to have you here, Yuan. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Paul, for the introduction. I'm going to introduce Dr. Alba Curry. Dr. Alba Curry is a lecturer in philosophy at University of Leeds. She holds a BA in philosophy and informatics from the University of Glasgow and an MA in Chinese philosophy from Fudan University, and a PhD in comparative literature/philosophy from the University of California, Riverside. She specializes in the comparative study of early China and Greece. Her forthcoming book defends the positive value of anger in ancient Chinese and Greek ethics and its value to contemporary philosophies of emotions, feminism, and artificial intelligence. She started her degree in video game design before philosophy stole her heart. That's so cool, Alpha. I'm super excited to hear about your experience in video game design and in philosophy. And last but not least, I'm going to introduce to you Dr. Frank Saunders. So Frank Saunders Jr. is assistant professor in the Department of Chinese Literature at Hong Kong Chu Hai College. He regularly publishes on early Chinese philosophy, specifically Confucianism and Taoism, and has translated several Chinese English academic works. He also runs a YouTube channel called Frank Philosophy, so please check it out. And please start your discussion.
So what I want to talk about for the next 10 minutes or so is a paradox that has shown up in aesthetics and the philosophy of art for hundreds of years now, right? Which is the paradox of painful art. And I will admit, right, that I'm going to need all your help, right? Because right now this is a sort of very idiosyncratic understanding of what's going on. I think video game players we're all very different. There's also a lot of very, very, very different games out there. So this may actually, my sense is that this is going to show up differently in different kinds of games, right? So what I'm going to do is, first of all, be as clear as possible about the paradox of painful art. Then give us some sort of sense of why gamers choose to play games that elicit negative emotions and what I even mean by that. Then I have some kind of tentative suggestions of what I think makes video games different from other fiction. So reading a book, watching a film. And I'll tell you again, I have a view, but I'm still developing the argument, right? So here's where the audience, right? Hopefully you all come in. So let's start with who kind of articulated the paradox of painful art first. So usually this is attributed to Hume when he wrote about tragedy. And I'll just read this quote. So he says, "It seems an unaccountable pleasure which the spectator of a well-written tragedy receives from sorrow, terror, and other passions, which are in themselves disagreeable and uneasy. The more they are touched and affected, the more are they delighted with the spectacle," right? So somehow when we watch a great tragedy, read a great tragedy, right, we will say, right, that this was a great experience, and yet, right, maybe some of us were in absolute tears, right, sobbing, right, or just horrified. And what Hume observes furthermore, right, is that in some sense, the more a film made you cry or a book made you cry, right, the better it was. How is this possible, right? How can you, and you know, how can you have these sort of negative feelings and positive feelings at the same time? Now, before I move on to how this is usually formalized, I'll just say that normally what we take away from what Hume is saying here is what motivates us, right, to put ourselves through these experiences. And think the one that I think people have an easier time relating to is horror films, right? Why do we put ourselves through horror films, right? So this is how I'm going to formalize the paradox. I don't think this is controversial. So the paradox has three main premises, right? The first one is that we generally avoid painful emotions, right? Like the plague. So, you know, you're going to avoid things that make you feel sadness, things that make you afraid, right? Or that you find distressing, you know, say if you're a student, right, you may wish to avoid presentations, etc., right? We normally think that negative emotions are undesirable and we go out of our way to get rid of them. Now, painful art elicits genuine negative emotions. So when you engage in tragedies, right, horror films, or even when you listen to melancholic music, we seem to be experiencing real sadness, right, sorrow or horror, right? You jump out of your seat, you'll cover your face, or you may, right? And the third premise is that we often enjoy this painful art. So how is that possible, right? How is it possible that if we normally try to avoid painful emotions, when it comes to experiencing them through art, we seem to derive pleasure from them? And we may describe them not just as pleasurable and moving, but also meaningful. So just to kind of fine grain a little bit, you can interpret, especially Hume's sort of articulation of it, in two ways. One, you could take it to be something like a weak version, where there's just somehow we're experiencing two incompatible emotional states. Most people in the literature think that that can't be what Hume was talking about, because we seem to do that all the time. So think, if any of you are gym bunnies, right? You will experience pain whilst at the gym, right? And at the same time be deriving pleasure from the fact that you can feel your muscles, right, strengthening themselves, right? Or the pangs of hunger, right, if you are cutting right now, right? And so most people think that's not what we mean. So what I'm going to talk about, right, is something like a strong version, which is what accounts for Hume saying that we are pleased in proportion, right, as we are afflicted, right? So it's, as I said, the more you cry, the more you enjoy it, right? That's the weird thing. Whereas it's not the more hunger you suffer, the more pleasure you derive from your diet, right? That's not how it works. So audiences seem to be taking pleasure in their own distress. And we really do think, right, that what it is to be a good tragedy is to make someone cry, or be sad if you're not a crier. So I'm not going to take you to all the solutions that have been written out there. I think if this was a paper, right, then that's what I would have to do. But I'll just sort of tell you the sort of 6 most popular solutions, right, is some kind of conversion theory. That's what some people think that Hume would suggest, right, that the pain gets transformed into pleasure in some way. Or that actually what we enjoy is the fact that we can control that situation, right? So if I experience horror whilst watching a film, right, I can just switch it off and I no longer feel it. Whereas if it was in the real world, right, and a bear is chasing me, there's nothing I can do, right? Other people think that there's some compensation that we get from this experience. Or there's some kind of meta response, right? So you're getting something kind of beyond that. One from Aristotle, right, is catharsis. You're just kind of getting rid of negative emotions in this safe environment. And then something called rich experience theories. So those would basically say this isn't a paradox, because it isn't true that what drives humans is just pleasure, right? So they will just kind of disagree that we're hedonic creatures. And that's, by the way, one of the things that Hume took for granted, right? That we are hedonic creatures. Okay, so what, if anything, makes video games different? So I'll say that the reason I'm interested in this is that I think there may be something cool that we can figure out about this paradox by looking at video games, right? Or that we may discover something unique about video games by looking at them through this paradox. So that's where I hope the philosophical interest lies. I can explain in the discussion that I have broader motivations for this project than just the philosophical project, but I just didn't have time to, get into that. But here I have some games that I've been thinking about. So one thing that's important to be clear about is I'm talking about single player games. So when I talk about Red Dead Redemption, I'm really thinking about just the single player experience. I think thinking about multiplayer games opens a whole different can of worms. But I'm thinking, right, so The Last of Us, I certainly am terrified every time I play it, and I have a lot of anxiety, and I have to play it at like 1 hour at a time, and then gather energy, and then put myself through that again. Why am I doing that? Right? Um, God of War, at least the last two, I would say, are incredibly emotionally moving games, right? And especially on the sort of negative dimensions with the conflict between father and son, etc. Yeah, so I'll leave that there, but please do tell me about the games that you play and the emotions that they elicit in you. All right, so well, what could possibly be making video games different from what I'm going to call canonical fictions, like most books and films? Well, clearly, right, the most distinguishing feature of video games is that they're interactive, right? You can't just passively surrender yourself to the game storyline. Right, what that means is they require active decision making, right? So we would call them interactive fictions, right? And insofar as they're interactive, they're about us, right? Why do I say that? Well, think about all the conversations you've had about the games that you've been playing, and you'll say, I killed a dragon, right? You don't say, The Witcher killed a dragon, right? You did it. And if you have someone watching you play, right, they'll say, you killed the dragon. They're not going to say The Witcher killed the dragon. And there's a very good paper by Robson Meskin where they talk about the concept of self-involving and interactive fiction and games being a part of that. Now they're much more interested in like fictional truths. A lot of the debate in aesthetics about video games has to do with truth claims. So that's kind of separate. Now, another thing that makes video games different is they involve play. We do have a lot of empirical evidence about how play is used both by humans and mammals and animals in general, right? So that adds an interesting dimension maybe when it comes to the role that negative emotions may play in video games. Now, I'll just say for the record that I don't think I need to argue that video games are art for this to really get off the ground. They're fictions, and we don't need to say whether we consider them art or not. Maybe some video games are art and some aren't. So, and here's the great thing: there's a lot of empirical evidence on video games, right? And we have empirical evidence that they do in fact improve our mood, right? When we're playing. So even though, right, I am scared to death as I'm playing The Last of Us or Soma, I'm totally stuck in that, right? I will still say, wow, I had a great time. That was great playing that. How is that possible, right? So, well, what would Hume say about this? So I will say not many people are convinced by what Hume has to say, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But for any of you that are curious, right, he does think that unpleasant emotions get converted into pleasurable ones. Now, if you think he means that literally, then that's a really terrible answer to the paradox, because that means the paradox doesn't even exist, right? Because you're not experiencing a negative emotion to begin with. So that can't be what he means. And so I think the best interpretation of Hume is probably Alex Neil's interpretation, right? And so he thinks that there's something about the impulse of or you could call it the energy, right, of the unpleasant emotions gets somehow co-opted by what Hume takes to be a stronger sentiment, for example, beauty, right? And so he has some kind of associationist psychology. This is still not a very good answer by most people's opinions of the paradox. So I'm kind of going to park our dear Hume there, as much as I like him. But I'll tell you one reason in the case of video games why, appealing to a sentiment of beauty probably really doesn't get off the ground. Oh, and I see I forgot my little sorry, I forgot to tell you who talks about the extreme difficulty of games. You can email me if you want to know. But one argument against thinking that video games are art is thinking about the extreme difficulty of video games, right? That doesn't seem to allow you to contemplate the beauty of what's going on as you're trying to survive, right? Great. So one of the problems that I've encountered in thinking about this is that I think our answer to the paradox of painful emotions may be completely different depending on what emotion we're talking about. And I do want to make a distinction straight away. Maybe I make it too quickly. You can let me know. And I'm not talking about when you are enraged at the fact that you're not very good at the game, right? I don't think that's the interesting emotion, right? So if any of you are, one of those people that breaks computers as you're playing, that's not the one I find most interesting, because I actually usually you'll stop playing that game, right? No, okay, yeah, we'll talk about that. But I think, I'm really thinking about the fear that you might experience in BioShock, right? The Last of Us, Dead Space, or for me, horrific anxiety playing Soma. I regret not having chosen the level of difficulty where I cannot be affected by these guys because I'm totally stuck, right? I think guilt might be a very interesting one. I'll say more later. The guilt that we experience making certain moral choices in video games. Of course, I've certainly experienced different types of grief. Hatred may be less interesting but I don't know, because I mean, one of the great things about hatred in video games is you can act on it, right? So people hate, say, Mika Bell in Red Dead 2, and they've done all kinds of things to him, and you can watch a lot of YouTube videos about that. Here's where I'm going. I kind of, I've been trying to attempt to think about whether the fact that a lot of that video games are self-involving interactive fictions, right? So by the way, that means I'm not talking about Tetrix. Whether that sort of helps us dissolve the paradox. And I have this sort of strong feeling that yes, right? For example, one of the things I've been thinking about is I don't really recall ever experiencing guilt as part of my consumption of a canonical fiction. I may experience guilt that I enjoyed a book that the world thinks I shouldn't have enjoyed, like, I don't know, I haven't read it, but 50 Shades of Grey, right? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just saying because I don't perform actions when I read canonical fiction in the fiction, right? I don't think I can experience guilt, right, as I'm reading that. Whereas I've certainly experienced guilt as part of playing video games, right? And in fact, I would say maybe for a lot of us, part of the appeal of something like Red Dead Redemption, right, or Elder Scrolls, right, is the fact that I can make morally regrettable choices that I come to regret, right? Now, the way I would answer myself is that maybe some kind of rich experience view of why we seem to enjoy negative emotions in video games would account for this, right? So it's thinking about is the fact that guilt feels icky really a problem if we're not just guided as human beings by pleasure, right? So, but I want to say, well, maybe Alba, video games, what they add to the conversation is not like a qualitatively different answer, but it's just a slightly different answer to the rich experience theory, right? And the other sort of type of answer solution that I've thought about is thinking about fear. And I think if you think about the types of things that people may say when they leave a scary film versus when they stop playing a horror game, seem to be quite different. So you may say, well, we want to distinguish between just choosing a genre, right, of video games, and then why we want to experience the type of fear that we experience in a game. So I can't really get into all the answers of the paradox that the horror genre has come up with. So Lovecraft, right, had a lot of great answers about sort of exposing yourself to kind of some kind of cosmic fear or etc. Right? I think I may choose to play The Witcher for those reasons, right? That might be part of the motivation for all the monster games that I love, right? But I still think there's something distinct about the type of about what fear is doing for me as part of the game. If that distinction, if I'm making that distinction with some clarity. So I think something that I might say, I can't believe I managed to get out of that room in the game without dying, even though I was absolutely terrified. That's where I'm stuck on Soma. I cannot get out of a room because I'm terrified and I can't do it quickly enough yet. Right. So I think what some gamers seem to be enjoying is the challenge of maintaining, right, your sharp skills, right, whilst being in an absolute state of horror. And that's not what we seem to enjoy about horror films. And right, we may also say we derive pleasure from getting better at handling the fear as the game progresses. But I think importantly, right, I don't think I want to say that what gamers enjoy is that at some point they will stop experiencing fear, because then you no longer feel the challenge, right? So it's not about somehow being able to block your emotions. I think we do still want to experience fear. Now, I worry that me articulating it in this way, right, tells us that what I may be suggesting is that the way to explain fear in video games is some kind of power theory. So there's someone called Amy Price, right, that talked about what we enjoy is the power that arises from the realization that I can endure in this game, right? So I'll put that thought out there. Now, I have spent a lot of time reading all the sort of research in psychology on negative emotions in video games to see where that leads me. And that's because of my larger motivations for this project, which, as I said, I can talk more about, right? But as I said, we have data that we do in fact derive pleasure from these games that elicit negative emotions, right? What we like about games is successfully completing challenging tasks, right? That's not something we do in films. And what a lot of the literature is interested in is that what we seem to be learning to do, the emotional regulation we learn through video games helps you in the real world. So that might be the motivation for exposing ourselves, right, to all this, all these negative emotions. And in fact, there is some suggestion that if you're good at horror video games, you will be better at school, right? Because you will, yes, exactly, because you will basically be able to manage that anxiety before the presentation or the exam, right? Because you've trained ways of kind of remaining cool, right? And still motivated, because, right, still motivated by that anxiety. But it's not conclusive evidence, I will say that. And I'm going to leave it there. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Alba. Same as before, if you have a question, you can raise your hand or type it in chat. And also, like, since we're waiting for these questions to come in, I have a quick comment. So on your last slide, for the thank you, it's sort of like an anecdote that I heard from another philosophy professor. He said that he had a student who was in the military for a long time, and he decided to come back for school after playing Elden Ring because he was pretty anxious about coming back to school and failing. But playing the game made him realize that failing is like a normal part of life. So
That's great.
it gave him like some inspiration to come back to school, and he shared that with his professor. So I thought like what you said on that slide is like, is right on point, right? It does. I mean, at least certain kinds of games do give you that resilience. It was just an anecdote that I
Yeah.
thought was relevant.
Thank
Yeah,
you. That's great. Yeah.
have a question, please. Frank.
Oh, yes. Thank you. I love this talk. I love the mention of Soma. That game is, I think it's a very smart game. I love it. Um, so I just had like a couple things pop into my head. I won't take too much time. Like one thing I was thinking of was like in terms of like at the very base level, contradictory or paradoxical pursuit of unpleasant things. I mean, like emotions and art is one case, but I'm wondering, like at even more basic levels, like pursuit of like spicy food, bitter tastes, even like thrill-seeking behavior, like people who go like skydiving and stuff. Like there's all sorts of like paradoxical motivations that are like outside of this aesthetic context, and I
Yeah.
wonder if maybe the interactive nature of video games can capture some of that because I mean there are sports video games, right? And sports are kind of like a setting where there's like a paradoxical like you put yourself through pain to achieve some other goal, which brings you to the second thing I just wanted to mention is like, so what if I say like, I don't play the games because they're scary. Like I play them in spite of the fear because they're good for other reasons, right?
Yeah.
So like it's not because so like I would just maybe disagree with Hume
Hmm.
and not say like, no, it's not like better because I cry more. It's better because there's other stuff going on and I'm also crying. Like I don't go to the gym to feel the pain. I go to the gym because I'm gonna get stronger. And like if I could go to the gym without the pain, like maybe there's some biological reason why like like you need to put in the effort to get the serotonin, but like it's not because of like so this like because of versus in spite of the
Hmm.
negative emotion was something I was also thinking about. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Frank. So there's a lot there. So the spicy, bitter, and even sour food, right? Because I now there's like all these like sour challenges on YouTube too, right? Um, yeah, I mean, I think that probably suggests. I had a student do a presentation about why they like spicy food. And I mean, the problem is, I think probably the way to solve something like spicy food is some kind of conversion theory in the sense that, I mean, I love spicy food, bitter food, and sour food, and the more sour, the better. But I do think it's, for me, simultaneously painful and pleasurable. Um, and then, you mentioned that one, but then you mentioned a separate case. There was the food. Maybe it'll come to me. And then the in spite and because. So this is one thing I've run into. I've run into problems making all the appropriate distinctions when talking about video games and kind of taking people through the right path. Because I do think that, for example, say you may play The Last of Us because you want to be a part of the release, the moment, people talking about it, the fact that it's a great story, and you do it um, despite the fact that it's a horror game, right? So you may have very different motivations to me for playing that game. Or Soma, right? Like I genuinely think the only way I'm putting up with how terrifying it is to me is because it's philosophically so interesting, right? So I think those cases are going to exist. But I guess I want to believe that there are gamers out there that like to play something like Dead Space or BioShock because they're terrified, right? But I mean, it's tough because it's tough not to get a project like this to just be kind of intuition pumps. Because, for example, I love horror films, but I've only ever watched two films that have actually scared me. So I don't watch them because they scare me. I think it's much more of the Lovecraft, you know, thing going on. So I think, yeah, that's the unfortunate part about a project like this, that I think there's going to be maybe as almost as many answers as there are people, and then that's not very philosophically interesting. Um, but I'll just say very briefly, why I'm interested in this. So obviously my work revolves around negative emotions and the value of negative emotions. And I've been trying to think about how to turn this kind of philosophical project into something that has impact in the real world. And one of the ways in which I've been trying to work on doing this is sort of working with young people on the value of negative emotions, particularly young people that are going through really tough times. And so two places where I've been trying to do that is video games and hip hop, right? Obviously, as two places that a lot of young people kind of feel comfortable experiencing them. So anyway, thank you.
Oh, yeah, Yedong has a question, please. Oh, Joanna, you can go. I think Yedong canceled.
Oh, no, I didn't.
Oh,
Sorry,
sorry.
I
Okay, sorry, Joanna, you'll go next.
Thank you, Alba, for your wonderful presentation. So my question is generally focused on the idea of a negative emotion you talked about, and you showed us a few so-called negative emotions, and I was wondering what is or is there any cognitive scientific basis for putting them as negative, or and what is its relationship with basic emotion theory, and also does language make a difference here? Because if you talk about games in the English context, of course, it's related to, if you think about the words origin, it's related to hunting, right? And it's related to something fun or pleasure or leisure in that respect. But if you talk about the word 游戏 in Chinese, for example, pleasure wouldn't be the first thing, okay, this word that evokes you, right? So I was wondering if the word the language makes a difference here, both in terms of the word 游戏 and in terms of the emotions you described or talked about. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Those are very good questions. So yes, it's true. I should have probably told you all what I mean by negative emotion. So normally in the literature, what they mean is that it's a phenomenologically unpleasant feeling, right? So it's associated with displeasure in some way. That's all they mean. Now, it's true that then that is taken to be negative in other ways, right? Negative in the sense that you avoid it. But people think that the reason you avoid it is because it doesn't feel good. And that's normally kind of where the conversation stops. In terms of how it's related to basic emotion theory, I mean, I don't engage a lot with how they describe negative emotions. They just say, right, we have the basic emotions, and a lot of people don't believe that there's such a thing as a basic emotion. So I'm not sure.
I say, basic emotion theory is modeled on, okay, I give you a few words, right? 7 or 8 that can
Yeah.
capture all the emotions, right? But if you scan, if you scan people's brain, right?
Yeah.
That may come as a spectrum or of waves, right? So that's what I meant by, because what you showed us is like a few words. So
Yep.
I was wondering a few categories. So I was wondering if
Yeah.
you do engage with any cognitive science in that in that part.
Yeah. No, thank you. I mean, I'll just say the truth. I as someone who works on emotions and philosophy, I'm very deeply skeptical of a lot of the research in psychology, and actually a lot of my work with computer scientists is about whether those models are robust. So I guess I have skepticism. Maybe is yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at.
It's just for clarification.
Yeah.
It's not meant for any criticism or
Yeah.
anything
No,
like
that's
that.
fine.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
then, but you asked a very good third question too. Oh, the language. My apologies. Yeah, actually, it's a very good question about how that might affect how people describe these things. I mean, I haven't had a chance to even think about how that works. For example, I speak Spanish as well. And I will admit I haven't even thought about it in Spanish if that would affect it. And maybe it's ill-founded to think about it in the binary of positive and negative emotion to begin with. And I don't really think people in aesthetics have really made that move and thought about it in that way. I guess that people in the rich experience answer, right? So they're trying to debunk the third premise. Maybe they would say that it's not helpful to think about pain and pleasure at all because that's not what motivates human beings or what the good life is about. Because really, like the paradox of painful, I think is a good way of getting into this problem, right? But ultimately, I think it leads you to ask yourself questions about human nature and questions about what the good life is, right? And the role that negative emotions play within that. So I guess, this for me was just like an entryway, but it's true that it opens, interesting, broader questions. I mean, I even before this talk, I was like, I haven't even had a chance to think about this through Chinese philosophy and what Chinese philosophy might want to say about this. So that's another possible avenue too. So thank you.
Joanna? I don't know. Joanna, do you still have a question? I think she right. Oh,
Yes, I still have a question. Sorry, it just threw me away. Thank you so much, Alba, for this incredibly interesting presentation. And the topic, I think, is incredibly relevant. And I was wondering, you mentioned that your project has this goal of understanding how engaging with the fiction that can elicit negative emotions can potentially help to go through some difficult times.
Yeah.
Uh,
Sorry, Joanne, I think you've frozen for me.
that there is some genre. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I can't hear you. Sorry, Joanna, you were totally frozen.
Yes, I'm really sorry. Something is going on with my connection. I don't know when I froze, but my question
At the very beginning of the question.
at the very beginning.
Wait,
So my
Joanna,
question was related to
maybe try
yes.
shutting off your video. Sometimes that helps with the connection.
Okay. Yeah. My question was related to whether you in your study consider that there might be some healing potential of video games that elicit negative emotions, because at least with horror as an art genre, I read some studies that try to maybe see some connection with why people who experienced trauma and they would go and play a video game that mentions abuse, for example, and it doesn't mean that they are re-traumatized, but it potentially can help them to overcome, like a sort of exposure therapy.
Yeah, thank you. I hadn't thought about that, but that would be a really good avenue to go down with. I mean, I suppose that would probably, it sounds like something like a power theory, right? That what we are getting out of exposing ourselves to these negative feelings is the fact that we are able to overcome them, right? And be okay. And I do know, right, that there's studies that that's kind of what we try to do in real life, and like why sort of many of us will end up with partners that are exactly like our parents, right? And we're kind of trying to relive something, but be able to do something this time because we're not children, that type of thing. So I'm definitely going to look more into that, because that does feed into the sort of broader project that I have in mind. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Frank, I think you can share your screen if you have slides, but otherwise you can begin your presentation.
Oh, okie doke. Let me share the screen. Can you all see? Are we good? Okay, cool. So thanks very much for this opportunity. I will set my timer. Thanks, Paul, for organizing. It's great to be here. Thanks, everyone, for the wonderful talks so far on a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And yeah, my current paper here, actually, it'll probably be closer to 10 minutes than has been the case so far. So I feel underprepared, but I'll do my best to say something substantive. So I'm approaching this kind of indirectly because I have a project that I'm doing right now about meaning and AI more generally. And one of the proposals relates, I think, to video games. So this was a good avenue for me to pursue. At least sort of two projects that I'm going to like half-bakedly sort of sketch out here. That comes from a broader project that I'm just setting the groundwork for about gaming and meaning in the sense of the meaning of life, not the meaning of words. Just to clarify. Okay, so there's this question in AI ethics, not so much about how do we make the models ethical and how do we, design models that, that do things that we like, but more broader questions of how rampant automation caused in large part by AI is just going to affect the meaningfulness of human life more generally, right? So there's, it's well known for better or worse that like people get meaning out of their jobs, for example, right? And if their jobs go away because robots do those jobs now, then they're going to be lacking a really important source of meaning in their life. So that's one worry. And there's all sorts of like policy questions about whether or not like we should start thinking about UBI and like from an economic perspective. For how to deal with this problem. But then there's also what literature calls the axiological problem, which is like, well, what's the philosophical antidote for a world in which like an increasingly large group of the population doesn't have access to a traditionally sort of solid source for meaning in their lives? And that's, jobs are one thing. But then also, now that we're living in an era where AI is doing more non-economically valuable work that's better than us. So like AI art, for example, AI chess players, robot athletes, right? Where these are domains that also seem to be like, oh, well, a robot will never do that, right? And yet, here they are. And I'll give you this example, right? If you're all familiar with the 2025 New Year's Gala for the Chinese New Year, Unitree debuted their dancing robots, and yeah, it's really cool, but man, is it terrifying too. Like, not like these robots took like at least 20 people's jobs, right? Like who spent their lives like learning how to dance. And it's like, well, a robot can do that now too. So like, and this is only going to get worse. Like, right? Like robots, are they going to take all the jobs? Like, probably not, but like it's an increasing share, right? And, you might say that people would be less motivated to pursue these kinds of activities if they know that a robot can do them better. So the broader question is how do we preserve meaningful lives alongside robots doing increasingly meaningful stuff? And of course, I want to look at any contributions that Chinese philosophy can make to this question. So one answer that I find kind of interesting that's most related to this topic is by John Danaher, which is that video games and virtual reality is the answer to where we find meaning in life, right? Because as the real world becomes more populated with AI or robot accomplishments, right? We're going to have robots making all the scientific discoveries, all the medical discoveries, figuring out how to organize human life in maximally efficient ways. We're going to need to find meaning from somewhere else, and John Danaher's answer is the virtual world, right? So he has this book, Automation and Utopia, Human Flourishing in a World Without Work. And this is where he lays out the argument for finding meaning not in the real world. And we'll talk a little about what that might mean. And he's got papers on this topic as well. He's written on this quite a bit. And his answer is like a very general, it's not just video games, it's VR understood in this more general way, virtual reality, where you can have a sort of minimalist view of VR or a more maximalist view of VR, right? So like a minimalist view of VR is like, I don't know, Immanuel Kant, right? Where like the world is created by our projections onto reality in this sort of like basic way that's unavoidable as human beings, right? So if we're using our imagination, if we're doing religion, right? When we project our beliefs onto the world, that's kind of a VR in a very minimalist sense. But then in like the maximalist sense, it would be like the Matrix, right? Where like all of our sensory perception is actually somehow faulty or being replaced or not real. Or like a VR headset that replaces everything. Brain in a vat, Descartes' evil demon, right? That kind of stuff. That's maximalist. But most VR that we deal with in a daily life is somewhere in the middle. Everyday VR, like our smartphones, like, our phones are kind of like an extension of ourselves nowadays. Social media, right? And I know Paul has done work on this with, authenticity and identity and our avatars and things like that. And video games, right? So video games. And now I'm finally at the topic. So I won't go too much into the arguments that Danaher makes. I think they're pretty good, as far as I can tell. The one argument is just like, it's the argument for the fact that we can actually have meaningful activities in a virtual setting, right? And the one, at least the argument that I'm most convinced by is the fact that, well, we already kind of do, to the extent that we already are, at least in a somewhat virtualized reality anyway. And if we just like do that a little bit more, or to a higher degree, I don't think the meaning vanishes, right? So basically, right, since we're already living kind of in a quasi VR state already, just doing that more isn't going to make our lives less meaningful if it's meaningful now, right? So like that's like the no difference argument. The other one is the conditions of meaning, which is that like based on a plausible theory of meaning, and there are different theories of meaning, right? There's this subjective view, there's an objective view. I think probably the most plausible is going to be like a quasi or a hybrid view, like Susan Wolf's, right? There's going to be subjective elements to doing something meaningful, but also these objective conditions that might have to be met as well in order to count as doing something sufficiently meaningful. And Danaher argues that like you can satisfy those conditions in a virtual world just fine. And then this really cool argument about utopia, which is like, so one of the like classic arguments against utopianism is that, well, those conditions can never happen, right? We can never have the situation where a society is just designed that way from scratch. And now it's like, yeah, we can just build a model, like build a VR. Like, of course we can, right? We could actually like, design a world that is more perfect, right, than the one that we live in the virtual world. So why not go for it? right? Especially when robots are doing all the stuff in this world. Let's just, build a paradise, like Soma, the Ark, right? Okay, so like those broader questions are interesting, and now I want to turn to Chinese philosophy, which I see contributing, at least right now. I mean, there's all sorts of ways it's going to contribute, but I see like, at least based on my background, I see like two sort of ways this could go. Um, uh, so like, and one is like broadly Confucian, and one is broadly Taoist. The one I'm most interested now is the Taoist one. Uh, Based on my interests and nothing else. So it's not any, judgment on Confucianism. But so like, I guess the question is going to be like the intersection between meaningful existence in virtual worlds and morality for Confucianism, right? So like, and there are a couple different ways where this could like develop. So like, I know there's not, I think the evidence is clear on this, that like the connection between virtual violence and real life violence is tenuous at best. And like they've been arguing about this since the 80s, right? Trying to ban violent video games, right? Um, okay, I can buy that. But what about in online communities? If you're a jerk in a video game, are you more likely to be a jerk in real life? Like what about that kind of like behavior in online games? And so this is where I see the intersection happening, right? Because like our rules and standards and values in a gaming setting, like in a game, is very different from those in the real world, right? Like behavior that would be normal on a football pitch or a rugby pitch or in the cage in an MMA fight, that would all be assault in the real world. But in that setting, it's okay. It's fine. There are still rules, but like we're okay with it in that setting, but we're not okay with it in the real world. Um, and like, where does that connect? And because that also relates to ritual, right? Which is this, big thing in Confucianism. So like the connection, so like video games as highly, especially online communities of players in like an MMORPG or something, where there are like standards that you expect from other players on like etiquette and like I don't know, like in Dark Souls, you bow before you duel or something, right? Like there's all sorts of, and like like where do those rituals interact with like a reflection of your character or your moral development more generally, especially because kids play a lot of video games. So like how do video games relate to childhood moral development, right? To moral education among the kids, right? Among young people. So I don't know. I'm gonna just I'll give an example, right? So I don't know if anyone's heard about this, but there was a guy. He's a streamer. This is pretty recently. Uh, Name I think is Pirate Software or whatever. Thor. I don't know. He's some guy. He plays video games. Huge, huge following, like massive, like hundreds of thousands of millions of followers on YouTube, tens of thousands concurrent viewers live on stream. But he like apparently he did something in game that like he basically left his friends to hang out to dry, allegedly. And like he got his friends into a zone where like they were underleveled or they couldn't have handled and the situation, and he like left. He just like left them, and those characters died. And like the whole internet got really mad at him for doing this, and he's not taking accountability, right? So that's what the title of this video, which is like a moral claim, right? It's like his behavior in the game is reflecting on his character. This is all allegedly, I'm not saying. But like the fact that people go this way, right? The fact that people look at your behavior in this like total virtual made up online space with like silly rules about like what you should and shouldn't do and how you interact with others and make like serious moral judgments out of it. That's fascinating, right? And I think it just goes to show this Confucian emphasis on the connection between like ritual and morality. It runs really deep. So that's one direction. The other one is games as games in something like the Zhuangzi, right? So in the Zhuangzi, we have it's not so much a moral approach to meaningful existence as it is following the Tao in a more general way. And there are lots of different ways you can follow the Tao in the Zhuangzi, not just the moral way, right? Not just becoming a Confucian gentleman or whatever. You can follow the Tao by cultivating a skill or a craft, right? And it's not necessarily a moral thing, right? So like the butcher, right? He's not a morally perfect guy. He slaughters animals for a living, and yet he can follow the Tao, right? And so like this kind of skill in video games is a way of demonstrating following the Tao as like another avenue for doing it. Is kind of interesting to me and worth thinking about, right? Is because people spend a lot of time playing video games, and people who don't get it might say, "Oh, you're just wasting your time." And people who are playing the game say, "No, I'm not. I'm doing really cool stuff in the game." And I feel like a text like the Zhuangzi might be able to tell us why they think that, and that the stuffy parents who just don't get it, don't. Because in the Zhuangzi, there's like and I think what's like subversive about the text is like when they attribute meaning to activities that typically wouldn't be considered meaningful, right? Like catching bugs or rowing a boat or cutting up oxen, right? Or playing video games, right? Like so I see that connection, and also a more general like theory of meaningful life in the Zhuangzi as well. Um, so those are just, and I'm pursuing this project a little more uh, directly right now in a paper form. But yeah, I thought I wanted to mention both in this context because I just want to hear more. I'm just spitballing here. This is just where I'm going here, and I just wanted to raise some stuff for people to talk about, and I think that's all I have. Oh yeah. One more thing I wanted to mention, right? So games as play versus games as new reality. So this is very like it's like traditionally games like and I think this was briefly mentioned, right? You play a game. It's like it is play, it's pretend. And the fact that it's like separated from what we normally consider to be meaningful activity might be something inherent to the experience that makes it difficult to replace meaningful existence with virtual accomplishments, right? Um, and yeah, so that's the other points I think I touched on already. So I'll just leave it there. Thanks for listening.
Wow, that was really cool, Frank. Um, so okay, Alba has the question.
Thank you.
Okay, I have so many questions, so I'm going to exercise discipline. I love the talk. Thank you so much. So I'll start with one more related to like the first part of your talk about uh, sort of finding meaning in virtual reality. And I was curious about the no difference argument. So one thing that I've been thinking about recently when it comes to VR is how that may or may not affect our ability to form political communities. And this actually came about because someone mentioned, what if we could create VR that substituted all the government statues for whatever you wanted, Godzilla, what would that do to our political community, right? Because of course, public art sort of plays an important role when it comes to nation building and all of these things, right? And so I guess I wonder, like, because I was like, the no difference argument, I guess, is presuming that someone is building a society from scratch in which we all take part in the same way, as opposed to kind of individualized utopias. Am I getting that right? So because I can presume, I mean, and Frank, I don't know you, but I'm like, I don't know if you could create your ideal society, it might look very different from mine. And if we get to choose to live in a virtual reality, why do we have to compromise and find meaning in the same ways and develop the same society and not different ones? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
Uh,
I'm going to ask that question. Yeah.
Okay, but I think thanks. This is really good, right? So the no difference view, I think I should clarify. The no difference argument, or maybe I could share my screen again just to so we have something to look at. The no difference view is sort of I think it's like it's more an in principle view, and it's different from, or it's an in principle claim, and it's different from the utopia claim, right? So like I think the no difference view, if I'm understanding Danaher right here, is that like like to the extent that our lives are already virtual to some degree, and we already accept that our lives are like virtually constructed in the sense that they're not, um, you know, carved at like there are no joints in the world to carve at, I guess, right? To do that like to a higher degree isn't like an in principle affront to the possibility of meaningful life. Right. So I think that's what the no difference view is. The utopia view, which I think the simple response to that is, and I think Donaher would might agree with this, is that like, well, no, you do get to choose your own utopia. Just find people who want to be, who design that utopia that you want to be in and go for it, right? Like, build, if you want a VR world where everybody, dresses like an animal avatar and like you live in a hippie commune and grow your own food, like that's fine. If you want to live in a capitalist, utopia or whatever, if you want to live in the world of Ayn Rand, like you can build that utopia too. Sure, go do it. Just model it, right? So like I think we have choices in that respect, and that's like the cool thing. We didn't have that before. We just had, it was purely in the imagination, but now we can actually like interact with these spaces, and people do, right? People spend a lot of time in VR chat
Mm-hmm.
uh, and build stuff, right? In Minecraft, right? So I don't know if that.
I mean, if I'll just can I because so then I guess there's there and maybe there's a very confusion concern, but I'm like, so is there no worry at all about the kind of degradation of a political community?
I think the claim would be that robots would probably make all those decisions in the real world for us,
Okay,
right? That
yeah,
that would have to be, right?
right,
It's
yeah,
that those problems are already solved
I
by the
see.
robots at this point. So
Yeah,
that like that step of science fiction must have already been taken at this point, I
that make
guess.
yeah, that makes sense actually. Okay, yeah, yeah, good, thank you.
Yep. Oh, great. Thank you.
Yedong has a question.
Oh, thank you, Frank, for a wonderful talk. And so I have two questions. The first one is about nonsense. And because after cybernetics, nonsense has really been a really significant field that is rediscovered in terms of information and or in informatics we can call those noise or in video games as well. So I was wondering, how does this idea of nonsense figure in, this idea of meaning, or, create meaning in the VR. And the second question I have is about you mentioned the very briefly UBI at the beginning of your presentation. So I was wondering if you can say more about UBI there and what how that figures in the whole project.
Okay, great. Thanks. So yeah, good. So nonsense, where does that fit in? So I think um I would probably, if I'm gonna guess where it would show up in this project, it'll probably be somewhere in the Zhuangzi, um, uh, where there's like a room there's room for nonsense or for like activity that seemingly doesn't have any value, like uselessness, right? That might have value somehow in unexpected ways. And I think
Can
nonsense.
I can
So
I
that's
clarify a bit?
yeah.
So I meant nonsense, not meaning you know, invaluable practices or not apparently meaningful practices, but more as in, incomprehensible practices or incomprehensible things.
Yeah.
What the real world actually affords us to make and do, but where does the virtual, because you do need to make that virtual world, right? So if
Yeah.
it's incomprehensible, you know, the idea is if you need to make that world, you need to understand the world, right? You need to kind of build it bit by bit. But where does nonsense fit in there? I guess that is what I meant by nonsense.
Mm. Well, I mean, so like I'm thinking of like I don't know, this probably doesn't answer your question. To be honest, I haven't thought about this before, but I'm just thinking of like how I don't know, like memes appear, right? Where like something that seems meaningless and insignificant becomes a ritual over time, like these very like silly, seemingly nonsensical practices in games that all of a sudden like become part of a language that like a group of people understand over time, and it's very organic and it's spontaneous, even though it's within a totally controlled world. Like I don't know, think of an example. So Elden Ring has these like messages that you can write down, right, for other players, and but it's from a fixed set of phrases and words and terms. And one of the ones you would always see is one word is fort and the other word is night. And they would just put that in the game and it's just Fortnite. It seems like nonsense, but then you show up to it and like thousands of people have interacted with this message, seemingly nonsensical, but now it's like part of it's like an in joke, right? So like I think there's really fascinating ways in which like in jokes can become part of the world in ways that people didn't intend, right? So like, I don't think the fact that the world is virtual is going to rule out spontaneous, organic, new forms of communication from something that started out as nonsense, or maybe it even stays nonsense, but then eventually changes over time. So that's just one thing that your question made me think of. I don't know if that's getting a little closer. Uh, and then your second question about UBI, yeah. So I only know enough about this part of the debate to stay away from it because I'm not really interested in the economic policy side of things. I have read like enough to like know where the pressure points are, and I think um like the debate I mean it mirrors like other social policy debates where it's like does the onus go on the government to create a UBI, or does it go on the corporations to not like automate every job that can be automated, or like are the corporations on the hook for engaging in practices that just totally dilute the workforce in a pretty radical way, and now make it the government's problem to give to give people the means to find their meaning in other ways, and that's like the policy question that um it's interesting, and I'm glad somebody's got to figure that out, definitely, but not me, not me. That's not my area.
I'm very glad that you mentioned economics at the beginning of the presentation because I feel like economics is the key. A lot of more massive online games collapse eventually because the economics doesn't work, and they are now hiring a lot of economists to design the economics systems in games so that it can collapse,
Yep.
Slower. And
Right.
but so I guess if you are talking about this world of VR, I mean not VR devices, but VR world, economics is the key here, and I think and I have all the confidence that you can find a lot of important topics there about economics.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Okay, so I'm gonna also ask a question. That was a really interesting talk. I mean, you touched on a lot of different things, so I think that's great because it gives us a lot to think about. But just trying to connect Alba's presentation with yours, and especially since you mentioned Sublime, it's sort of a very, interesting, unique human experience. But I think,
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be restricted to like a Sublime experience because, as Alba was saying, video games can elicit all sorts of human emotions that, well, negative in her examples, but a lot of times also really positive, pleasant experience. And those are, I think they definitely can be meaningful at the very least. And we seek those sorts of experiences in video games. So yeah, maybe the emotion part can be part of where the meaning comes from. Because I mean, for example, in real world, I'm just never going to be able to wield a giant sword and cutting, like imps. I don't know, it's just not gonna happen. Um, but I get to experience that in video games, right? And many other things. So
Hmm.
yeah, so maybe like the emotion part can be
Hmm.
um like a distinct argument from the utopia one.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So, right. So I should clarify, right? So the theory of meaning here is going to include subjective states that like are going to include emotions built in, right? So like, you ha the feeling has to be there. It can't just be that you're like miserably serving the world to make it a better place and you hate every moment of it and that's where you get meaning from. Like, no, no, no. There has to be like, subjectively satisfying experiences are built into it to any theory of meaning that's worth its salt. Um, at least, so that's going to be part of it. And so that's I think built in. I think the mention of the sublime and the utopian. I think together, and actually they are two separate arguments in the paper. I'm simplifying it to combine them in this way, because they both point to the fact that virtual worlds give us access to things that we don't have access to in the real world, right? So it's not just like, oh, I get to feel all the feelings that I would normally feel in the real world, so I'm not missing out on anything, right? That's like one side of the coin. That's the no difference view. That's the conditions of meaning view. This argument is more like, no, we get more in the virtual world, right? We can build more perfect societies and we could experience emotions that would be impossible to experience in the real world, like wielding a giant sword or seeing the world from like 5,000 feet in the air, flying around, right? And doing stuff like so. So the fact that VR gives us access to these emotions that we don't have access to in the real world is like a bonus. And I sort of just simplified things. VR gives us access to stuff that we don't have in the real world, whether it's emotional, whether it's political, whether it's idealized in whatever way. And that's the simplification on my part, just for. But I think you're right. I mean, they do have to be treated separately, and they should be.
Yeah, I mean, that was a really great clarification. I think like we understand these arguments a lot better now. But like also what I was saying is we can have these may perhaps heightened emotions, so not necessarily sublime, but just like a heightened fear, because I'm just not going to really see ghosts in the real world, right? That's why I'm like, if I'm a horror game fan, that's what I'm looking for, right? I want that um, sort of like heightened fear, or
Mm.
if so, it doesn't have to be like sublime. I feel like sublime is such a high standard, but maybe
Yeah,
they
yeah,
can
yeah, yeah.
give you like, that's what I was talking about. But
I
regular
see.
emotions, but just a
Yep,
little more like
totally.
readily available. Yeah.
Yep, yep, absolutely.
So and that I was just trying to connect your project with Alba's project, and maybe Alba has some comment on it.
Actually, if I can have, it's related. It's a second question that I had, because one thing you made me think a lot about the question about moral development, and like what's sort of morally okay in video games versus what's sort of morally okay in the real world. And I had a really funny experience during COVID. I'm sure a lot of us were playing games during COVID, and a lot of our social interactions were in games. And I there was a so if you played Red Dead Online, right, it's perfectly okay for people to kill you and steal your stuff. But somehow during COVID, I met a lot of people that had maybe initially done that and then felt bad and found me and tried to get me to be a part of their gang. And I wonder, because we were all maybe experiencing more loneliness or things like that, that the
Mm,
stakes were sort of higher. And then you're like, no, actually, I don't want to just be a jerk to people, even though that's what this game is about. It's no longer
right.
a game because I want to build these relationships. And it's wild because I'm still talking to these people after 2 or 3 years, right? And so
Wow.
it did pay off that they
Yeah, yeah,
came to
yeah.
me and said like, oh my God, we stole all your skins.
Yep, yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So
No,
anyway, then.
I think this is really like this gets to the core of I think the thing I just mentioned at the very end here, which is like oh sorry like uh I forget even where I said it, but like the fact that the real world situation matters, it's going to matter to how we treat the virtual reality situation, right? So like, and I guess it's this tension between like play versus real. It's like, well, if the virtual reality becomes real, then like we're going to treat it differently, right? Maybe it won't be as playful anymore, right? So like, if all your friends are now in Red Dead Redemption, like, and because you're not going to the bars anymore to go tell your buddies, like, oh man, I totally like crushed this noob. Like, oh man, you should have seen it. Like, you're not doing that anymore. It's like, oh no, these are my only friends. I should treat them well, right? So that's the way in which like the real world interacts with the virtual world that's going to influence like how this relationship goes. So, like again, this is like kind of like a highly idealized version where like Danaher is like we're assuming that like okay, it's like 80 years down the road and like 60% of the population is unemployed and living in VR. Like, how do we do it? Right. But at this point, and like for at least the foreseeable future, if we don't take that, sci-fi jump, like I think we're gonna have to negotiate in a more complicated way between, virtual worlds and not only and like multiple virtual worlds, right? Because we have multiple identities because we play multiple games and like it's very it gets but I love that example because yeah, that illustrates exactly like what when it um the social interaction virtually has influenced by maybe the real life social interaction in that way. Yeah, I like that. Thank you.
Thanks.
I think we have time for one quick question, if you have any. I mean, it's such a rich presentation. I feel like we can talk about these for hours and hours. So it's
All three.
2 minutes. It doesn't do it justice. But I'm happy to like connect with y'all after this as well if we want to talk about these more. And also I guess we don't have time for full-blown questions. So I'll share another anecdote. My brother and I both played Elden Ring, but he gave up on Dark Souls. I didn't. I think sometimes it is the difficulty um, that makes the games interesting. And it is not, I mean, it's not about like you're better than someone else because, you can get through this game. It's about sort of like reflecting your values, why you think this game is valuable to you. I mean, it's not to my brother, he just doesn't think it's worth his time, which is totally valuable, but I think it's totally worth my time. So I don't think, it's just universal, but what we spend time on reflects our values. And
Hmm.
I still think it's very funny that he just like, oh, this is too difficult. Like the negative emotions of frustration and whatever, right, just overwhelmed him, and he just think, okay, it's fine. But it didn't quite overwhelm me. So I think it's about being able to handle the negative emotions within the individuals as well. Some people are just like, oh, this
Mm.
is too frustrating. I can't do
Yep.
it. But sometimes the frustration is what gives me the drive. Like I have to beat this boss now, right?
Yep. And,
Anyway, that
and
wasn't the question, and we're out of time. Thank you so much
huh.
for the presentations. They're all really interesting.
Thank you, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you so much
Thank
for hosting,
you.
Yandong.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Yandong.